Hey guys, you know what the Wookiee said to the droid?
I can imagine, but you're going to tell us, I'm sure. Yep. It was a good one.
Most unlikely of villains, schools of playing and for pause. Does it talk? Does it know how? Does it boggle? Does it meow? In the lair of the cerebral bore, has I shown him so much more? The legal brains at the
Hey everybody, before we launch into the episode proper, I just wanted to stick a little quick message in here to say, to acknowledge the clip art that we use for the show by Ray Otus and the wonderful music, which you just heard the intro. And if you stay to the end, you'll hear the outro by our Mysterious Benefactor. Thank you guys for your contributions. And now, here's the show already in progress.
All right. So the anecdote I was going to tell you guys about is that it's an interview with George Lucas, and I'm pretty sure it's James Cameron, because I think they're sort of talking about the idea of like the way that Avatar is kind of subversive of military industrial stuff, and George Lucas is thinking about the Ewoks as like the closest comparison being the Viet Cong in Vietnam, and it's really funny.
We'll have to find that. If you know where you saw that, we'll put a link.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're the only ones who practice insurgency warfare.
Yeah. I think a lot of people dislike the Ewoks because they also made them cute.
Yeah. Even though, I mean, as our friend Jason will point out, the Ewoks are also, in addition to knowing how to practice insurgency warfare, they're also like canonically cannibals, right? Like they were going to eat all of our heroes until C-3PO convinced them not to, or with Luke's help, right? So,
yeah,
you know,
which makes you wonder why they didn't. Why were they? They gave Leia, they made her some new clothes and braided her hair and treated her really well. Probably because Wicket came back with saying she's a friend, but
yeah, probably.
Maybe they associate the other with the stormtroopers. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah. I remember this is unrelated to like it probably when you think about the Ewoks fighting the stormtroopers with spears and bolas and stuff like that, but I remember I don't know how many times I watched Return of the Jedi as a kid and as an adult, and again, and when I finally watched it with my son several years ago, and there's a scene where Han Solo punches a stormtrooper in the face, and I'm like, what is that armor even for?
Yeah.
Like, just bare knuckle punches him in the face and knocks him down. And I'm like, what purpose does that serve?
Maybe it was a force.
That's funny.
And Han Solo is secretly a force user.
As opposed to, there's a similar sequence in the animated Star Wars: The Clone Wars movie that came out before the second Clone Wars animated TV show, where one of the clones punches a droid in the head and then goes like and shakes his fist like he broke his hand trying to punch the droid in the face because it's made out of metal, which is pretty good.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah, but by the end of that entire the film and the subsequent, I mean, I think they showed the clones are pretty. I mean, they're elite.
Clones are pretty ferocious when they get down to it. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, welcome to Cerebrivore, everybody. We are talking about Star Wars today. I have two of my esteemed colleagues here. By the way, DJ Boyd, normally the host of the Arcane Alienist. But I have with me, who else have we got here? Why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
Go ahead. I'll go first. Hi, I'm Arlen, and I do live from Pelham's Wasteland stuff. Not really on Anchor anymore, but on YouTube a little bit. So
yeah. I'm Karl, and I do the Geomologist Presents podcast in YouTube. I guess I need to throw a blog in or remind people that I have some publication credits from back in the early aughts.
Wow!
To establish an empire, but yeah,
Emperor Karl the First.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Arlen, I know lately you've been reading excerpts, for your channel. Have you ever thought about doing the Star Wars? You could either read the screenplay, or they do actually have a shit. Don't you seen
So
they've converted the entire saga to Shakespearean plays.
So they've got the Shakespearean plays, and I have the original trilogy in the Shakespeare plays. They also did, speaking of things, the same people did the scripts for the Avengers movies as Shakespearean plays,
Oh,
which I think
wow.
is funny. But also because they only did the actual ones titled Avengers, and so like Captain America: Civil War, that basically sets up Infinity War, isn't in that collection at all, which is just funny.
Yeah.
But there's also, so I've read a couple of Star Wars books, including the novelization for Revenge of the Sith, that is like actually great. Like it's not great literature, but it's pretty incredible how some small changes make that story so much better, including like some of the simple things like because it's not all like shot on sound stages, and so there's all sorts of things that in the movie look really silly because they just happen next to each other because the actors didn't have anywhere to go, like in that when the Jedi land on Coruscant and then Padme Amidala is there and Anakin goes to her and hugs her and they're standing like 15 feet away from all of the most powerful people in the Republic while apparently being in a secret relationship. And so in the book, when it just describes it as happening further away, it's like, oh, suddenly it makes sense that they're able to, keep their relationship secret.
Although he could have fixed that entire scene by just having Anakin do the Jedi mind trick.
All sorts of things you could do differently in the prequels.
Yeah.
But also there's some cool stuff, like there's a whole sequence, most of that sequence that's on General Grievous's ship. A big chunk of it is from Count Dooku's perspective, and it's Dooku kind of talking through what he expects to happen. That they're going to kill Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he is going to get captured by Anakin Skywalker so that he will be available, unsullied by his connection with the separatist movement when the festering issues at the heart of the Republic come to be revealed, so that he can kind of take his position of power as being like, oh, he's a political prisoner who has been freed from the corrupt government, sort of thing, which is really cool because obviously none of that comes through at all in the movie, right? Dooku is just there and then dies in Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah.
So
I think
I think we should talk about our first experience with Star Wars.
Yeah,
we could do that,
and then get into our experience with Star Wars role-playing games, and then I'm sure anecdotes will follow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
That sounds like a good plan. So
just like words of wisdom from Sir Alec Guinness as Ben Kenobi, or the other guy,
Ewan McGregor.
Yeah.
All right. Who wants to?
BJ, go ahead.
Okay. First experience with Star Wars at all. So I was 2 years old when the movie came out, the first movie.
Okay.
So I missed out on that completely. But when they had the movie re-released in the theaters before The Empire Strikes Back hit, and my mom took me to see it. Then
you'd be like not 8 or 9 or 10.
I would have been like 5.
And 8 and 8. Yeah, I guess that's right.
Yeah, I would have been 5 years old.
Wow.
And so I have vague memories of that, a little clearer memories of seeing The Empire Strikes Back in the theater. But probably the foundational experience for me more than anything was getting the toys for Christmas. And then after they were at that point, it was Empire Strikes Back, post Empire Strikes Back. So I got like got the Millennium Falcon and some action figures and one of the Hoth play sets. But that was, and it was one of the few times we actually had a white Christmas where I lived. So took my Hoth play set out in the actual snow in the front yard. So, and had Han Solo destroy the probe droid over and over again. So that's my earliest memory with Star Wars. What about you, Arlen? What was your first experience or earliest?
It definitely would have been on VHS tapes. Because I was also I was two when wait, when did the Phantom Menace come out?
90, 1999.
99. Okay, I was four when the Phantom Menace came out in theaters, so I didn't see it in theaters. But we had the original trilogy on VHS that I watched a bunch as a kid, and then also because that was when so I didn't see the Phantom Menace in theaters, but I saw Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith because I was old enough by then, and there was also like just a ton of right. It was for a while. It was sort of like the first Star Wars Renaissance before like the Disney version of that, where there was all this like Clone Wars stuff. So like there were a whole bunch of video games. Like I played like literally in the thousands of hours of Star Wars Battlefront 2, the original one with my buddy. So that was a big thing for me for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, I'll date myself. I actually saw the original Star Wars New Hope in '77 here in San Antonio. And then my dad took a job at NIH and NSF for a few years, and we moved to Maryland. So I saw it's a great set of like 4 years if you think about it. So '77 was for new properties and iconic movies. So '77 Star Wars. Then in '78 in Maryland, I remember seeing Superman, the Christopher Reeve Superman. '79 was Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I remember seeing that in Silver Spring. And then at '80, caught we were leaving that year back for San Antonio, but in '80, I saw it. It just newspapers were so funny because that's where you see all the movies were. So I saw it before we left in Maryland, and then we came back to San Antonio. It's like, oh, 70 something or 50 something weeks, in theaters. Like they kept it in the theater for so long.
Yeah.
Those movies back then, and I was able to see it again when I came back to San Antonio. So yeah, it's great to be there for me, I guess when it started. And I remember, and I had a friend who had like all the stuff. I didn't get a lot of the stuff, because my parents made me like do chores and I'd get allowance, and then that was a slow process to buy Star Wars figures. But I never had like oh no, that's not true. I think of one Christmas I did get the Death Star playset, but I know a friend of mine had like the Millennium Falcon and the Death Star playset, and we'd play and go do stuff. And the sad thing was, like, when we got to middle school, I guess by the time Empire Strikes Back and others, I guess maybe it's a different type of friends, we would like use some of the extra stormtroopers for July 4th practice, right? Blow them up and stuff. But I had friends who like totally kept them collectible and stuff too, and like, oh no way am I going to let you touch my stuff because I know what you guys do or whatever, So it was good. And then I was happy to see the second trilogy come about. I've always been interested in the verse. The Heir to the Empire, Timothy Zahn trilogy was a big one. I read the Alan Dean Foster, I guess, I don't know, what do you call them? And they make the novelization of the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, also Alien was around that time too, wasn't it?
Yeah, 79.
Yeah. 79.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
It had a big run of science fiction and fantasy.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a awesome property. I really generally like most things Star Wars. Some of the newer stuff I might not like as much, but it is still a Star Wars. And I guess ultimately try to pull out what you think is cool and will work in your canon verse. If really, ultimately, I think nowadays when I see movies or watch video games, I try to crib ideas for the next campaign, right? So
yeah.
So I think it's pretty cool, and I really enjoyed like the Clone Wars a lot, and then the Rebel stuff, Bad Batch.
I'm kind of curious, Arlen being a different generation than me and Karl. Well, Karl, I'll ask you, Karl, first. When you saw the sequels, did you enjoy them? Were you disappointed? Did you have kind of mixed feelings about it? What was your reaction to the sequel trilogy or the prequel trilogy? I'm sorry.
Oh, the prequels?
Yeah.
The Clone Wars stuff, right?
Yeah. Not the animated, but the three movies.
Yeah, the three movies. So Phantom Menace at all, right? Attack of the Clones, and is that right? Revenge.
Yeah,
Revenge of the
Phantom
Sith.
Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, I thought they were very good visually. I did like, who they, generally speaking, I liked Ewan McGregor. I didn't mind Natalie Portman. I think Hayden Christensen, I think rightly so, takes a bad rap for some of his acting there, I really did enjoy, again, jumping into the Star Wars verse in the first one, Phantom Menace, and then Attack of the Clones, and then I was definitely disappointed, I think, with the last one.
Yeah.
But
I remember walking out of the Phantom Menace wanting to have liked it and having to admit to myself that I didn't like it.
Huh.
It took me a couple of days to really kind of settle it, and then I felt like they got progressively better.
Yeah,
but yeah, I just know that's because I have nostalgia for the original one. So I'm kind of curious, Arlen, with you've probably seen the other ones on VHS, but you were much younger. Did you have any sense that, or I don't blame people who were kids when the prequels came out. If that's Star Wars for them, that's perfectly fine. I think sometimes old guys like us should probably chill out a little bit on that. Go ahead.
I think certainly when I first saw them, I was like, oh, this is kind of fun and interesting, and I definitely was like interested in and attached to the world. Like the world in the prequels, I think, feels really expansive in a way that in some ways I think the original trilogy doesn't quite capture, right? The sense of like, hey, there's like this huge universe with like 1,000 planets in the Republic, and it's gone on for so long and all this stuff. And that was really exciting to me as a kid. Having grown up from there, I think my general position is that the Phantom Menace is not good. Attack of the Clones has like a third of its scenes that are good and the rest of them that are not good. And Revenge of the Sith has the sort of best percentage hitting, if that makes sense, and even then has some issues. But I also think that the movies are complained about or reviled or criticized online for a lot of really like dumb reasons by people who apparently can't like pay attention to what the actual script says. The classic one being, right, in Revenge of the Sith, Obi-Wan comes to Mustafar to confront Anakin, and he says, only a Sith deals in absolutes. I will do what I must. And it seems like the criticism is like, well, obviously that's like, hypocrisy from Obi-Wan, and that must be because George is a bad writer. And it's like, well, no, it's not because George is a bad writer. I mean, he is a bad writer in a lot of places, but this is the whole point of the prequel trilogy is that actually the Jedi are kind of bad and have done a lot of bad things to perpetuate their own existence, right? That like when Obi-Wan tells Luke that it was like it was so wonderful back in the day, and then you end up on Tatooine in the prequels, and it's like, no, Tatooine was always a shithole, right? It was always like, it was run by the Hutts and full of slavery. It was always bad, even in the glory days of the Old Republic. It was just better for some people, and that's like what the prequels are thematically about. And that I think there are a lot of people who heard Obi-Wan saying like, and a more civilized age, and assumed that therefore because it didn't look like that, that must be because nobody who was involved in the movies knew what they were doing.
It was awesome. It was just better than now.
Yeah, well, and a lot of like, better for who stuff, right? Like it was probably a lot better for people living on well, not everybody living on Coruscant, but some of the people living on Coruscant, it was better for anybody living on Alderaan, but
True, of course.
I don't know. I think I only gained a better appreciation for Revenge of the Sith after I watched the Clone Wars.
I feel like one thing Dave Filoni is good at is going in and like, okay, we screwed this up. Bring in Dave Filoni. He'll fill in the blanks and take the sting off of what we just did. He's done that with the Clone Wars.
Well, and that's
for the prequel era, but I think also he kind of with the the Mandalorian and stuff. He's sort of
Well, and I think that's the odd thing is that for like all of like the way that so much stuff looks just so fake in the prequels because the CGI is just not technologically there yet. There's
yeah.
also really cool stuff, especially in so before the newer 3D animated Clone Wars, there was a 2D animated Clone
Mhm.
Wars TV show that played in like the summer of 2004 before Revenge of the
Yeah.
Sith came out. That was a setup for Revenge of the Sith, introduced General Grievous, and so that's
Mhm.
why in Revenge of the Sith they don't like introduce him at all. 'Cause they just assume
He
you
showed
saw
he was
this.
there. Yeah.
It
Yeah,
also
they
it
just assumed
also
you saw the cartoon
it
for
also was the
children.
was the
Apparently,
original place they introduced Asajj Ventress.
Yep. That's
yeah,
right.
introduced to styles of interest there, had a whole bunch of that kind of expansive world stuff, and also had some really cool like the last kind of arc of the show um, is both the attack on Coruscant that we see basically the end of at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith, but then also Anakin goes on this like crazy spirit quest vision to
Yeah.
save a tribal people who is being abused by this separatist organization that is stealing all the people and then turning them into mutants and stuff. And there's a great sequence near the end, basically to destroy their power source. He uses his prosthetic robot hand to destroy it, but it damages his hand, and he's left his lightsaber back home because he's not allowed to take anything. So right at the end, he basically like has to fight like Darth Vader to end this conflict, and it's so good as like a great demonstration of like this is why Anakin Skywalker falls to the dark side because it actually makes sense. And so it's great when you see him like force choking people because he has no other weapons, and it's
Yeah.
like, oh, this is like really remarkably good like visual storytelling
Yeah.
explaining this character
It
in a way
was
that
it was animated in
is
the
yeah.
style of Samurai Jack.
Right.
Yeah, well, it's the same Tartakovsky, Jenny Tartakovsky, who did Samurai Jack, did that one, and it's great. It's totally
Really good.
worth checking out.
Also, speaking of Tartakovsky, there's a series on Netflix called Primal. There are 2 seasons of it. That is a very
Yeah, it's also
um,
him. Yeah, yeah.
very bloody, violent.
Yep.
Uh,
I've only seen like the first couple, since it looks. I'd like to watch more. Well, cool. So, what? I guess
well, let's do one other
I don't know.
question, then we'll move on to role playing games. And I guess what
Sure.
what were you guys' thoughts, just briefly, on the sequel trilogy in that era?
It just to me it ruined a lot of story arcs that I thought were going to happen based on the previous, you know, based on well, the things I had read, the original series, right? It's just like I don't know. I think they could have done so much more with all the material out there, and they chose literally a rehash of number 4, right?
Yeah,
With just a bigger weapons platform.
yeah. I think if the Doomsday device had not been a large planetoid in space, they probably could have got away with it. Any other kind of Doomsday device, they probably could have got away with it. But that just it's just a little too far.
Yeah, just way. I mean, I don't know, over the top. I don't know. I don't think well thought out. Just
I,
breaking. I mean, right? I think you want to have like world consistency, right? Or consistency in when you have these. I don't know. It's like you guys had never, like they didn't understand the lore. I guess that, to me,
yeah,
is.
I
I
feel
get
like
it. They want to make it their own. That's what that's their privilege, right? The screenwriters and
well, I kind of feel like they wanted TIE fighters and stormtroopers as the bad guys, and a Sith as the bad guys, and so. But to get there, I think the best way I've heard it put is they robbed the heroes of their victory.
Mm.
You know, and if you read the expanded universe, they had their ups and downs. You know,
Right.
after that, and trying to stabilize the Republic. But at the end, they're at least from the movie's perspective, well, they got their happy ending. If there's another generation that is going to have to, the dark side is obviously going to come back, and new heroes are going to have to do it. But to kind of just destroy everything that the original heroes did, that just felt kind of cheap.
Yeah. Well, also to me, it just seems technologically implausible, right? Based on the
Yeah.
technology that you've been used to for the last, 77. How long is that? Almost 50 years, right?
Yeah.
Or well, when did these come out? 40 years, right? Came
Yeah.
out. So
Yeah, 2016, right? For
Mm-hmm.
The Force Awakens.
yeah. So I mean, this is a technology that you, yeah, this is a technology that you was consistent throughout most of the Star Wars, and then all of a sudden it just gets, it gets like I don't know, Dune like. I mean,
Yeah.
it's ridiculous, almost to the point of like fantasy. I mean, I know it's a fantasy space opera,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's also it's odd they went so hard into making like all of the world stuff visually look totally like the original trilogy, just kind of updated to be a little, shinier and technologically proficient and stuff.
yeah,
Right, it's clear that the people inside Stormtrooper costumes can actually see out of them, unlike in A New Hope. Um, but the actual like aesthetics of how all three movies, but especially it's I think really obvious in The Force Awakens, are like shot is totally different from how Star Wars originally was shot. And you will see silly people online say like, "Oh, it's so much more like technically well shot," and I will tell you that I don't think that's the case, and I think that's not the case because Star Wars, the original trilogy, like the core arc of the series is Luke and his growing connection to the Force. And so the way that it is shot is and the way that it is structured, like as a film trilogy, is really deliberately about separating essentially the mundane world that everybody can access and the Force existing world, right? That's part of why in like the first one, there's basically nothing that happens that suggests of like a character's perspective happening on film,
Mm.
right? It's all very neutral until finally we get right Obi-Wan speaking in Luke's ear as a voice to be like, yeah, this is like reality. This is not just something him like remembering his mentor. This is like a real experience in a real world that is like existent beyond just this character, and that develops into the sequence on Dagobah in the cave, and then finally at the very end, right when Luke can see the Force ghosts and Leia can't, and it's like, yeah, this is like the core arc of that trilogy. And so then when you have a movie that is shot in a much more like standard action movie way that does a lot of that kind of transforming the on a shot level, transforming what's happening to suggest being like part of the character's perspective, that then you kind of get rid of that assertion of reality and it's not.
Yeah. I think part of the something, at least for the two that J.J. Abrams did. J.J. Abrams, and I kind of feel this way about his Star Trek as well. J.J. Abrams is good at making a fun movie. It's like being on a roller coaster. And then when you get home and you're in the shower and you're replaying the movie in your head, you go, "What? That made no sense." Even within the canon or lore of the universe, you're telling that didn't make any sense.
right.
Um, so I thought that was kind of, I think, just I think you're bound to get that with J.J. Abrams at this point. He's done that in every movie I've ever seen of his. What I also thought was interesting in the sequel trilogy is there were some really cool ideas in The Last Jedi, but it seems like they should have come as part of the third chapter, and not where Luke is talking about we misunderstood the Force. All this, the Sith and the Jedi locked themselves in defining the dark side and the light side in a certain way, which has caused all this conflict and brought us to this point. That was a really interesting idea, but it just kind of got buried in all the other suckitude of.
Well, I think that's part of my
Literal
thought
subject.
about like people not paying attention to what like actually happens in the prequels and what like characters actually say, is that like why did Disney think that we were going to like it any more the second time, when like that's what the prequels are all about, right? Is that like the Jedi have been in power for so long that they've totally come to this assumption that like, well, they're in power because they're the good guys, and that's not really the case at all. And so,
Yeah.
people didn't like it the first time when George did that. So I don't know why they would expect them to like it anymore.
Well, and just
And again,
to,
it's like
just
you
to
said, it's
prove,
like,
yeah,
go ahead.
just to put to dot the I and cross the T on that. They tried it again with the Apprentice.
Yeah.
Or the Acolyte.
The Acolyte.
The Acolyte.
Yep.
Nobody liked it.
Yeah, people just don't like. I mean, yeah, people don't like it. I
well,
mean,
and
the problem is, I guess you do that in a 2-hour movie, and then people haven't watched, eight seasons or whatever, 9 seasons of the Clone Wars, right? And you get all the nuance in a TV series, and you can see, yeah, I mean, that Clone War was like, and real. I don't know if the Jedi were bad or what. I mean, it's hard to say. I think they were just caught up in their own
The idea is that
bureaucracy and self-righteousness.
They became kind of arrogant and self-righteous.
Yeah, and then because I was like, how it's so obvious what Palpatine is doing. How come you guys can't see it? Right? To me, I was like, it's so dumb.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that in my mind, can't but I do that when they show what the bad guys doing all the time. But
I want to one of the things I just want to. Oh, go ahead, Arlen. I'm sorry.
Okay, I was just gonna say, I think it's also similar to the idea of like in a longer TV show. I think that basically like the best expression of actual like the moral conundrum of the Jedi versus the Sith is basically expressed in Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, which are video game character RPGs. The first one was done by BioWare, and the second one by Obsidian, and they are really great. They have not aged perfectly because they came out in like 2003 2004 era, but really a great demonstration of they're set long before any of the events that we see on screen. They're in the real like Old Republic stuff, but a great demonstration of like how to explore through characters this issue of like, well, the Jedi want to be good but aren't always there, and the Sith are sort of not just evil Jedi, they're kind of their own thing, but they're also sort of like an version of that. And the idea that the story is totally about how like the Jedi Council was like, no, we can't go fight in this war, and then Revan is like, no, we have to go fight and save the Republic because there are people dying, and then that causes Revan to be disillusioned with the Jedi Order and turn to the Sith and start another whole war. Is like, well, so the council was sort of right, but also the council was sort of wrong, because if they had just like, actually supported this thing from the beginning, maybe it's a really well done exploration of, I think, all of the things that anyone who writes Star Wars and wants it to not just be like black and white is sort of trying to get at.
Yeah.
Well, I guess they're trying to do that
from a certain point of view kind of thing, right?
I feel like they're trying to do that with the Acolyte, because that seems like on the surface the Acolyte was trying to be about, but
yeah,
I just think that there are a lot of lame decisions, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, on the flip side, Skeleton Crew, if you guys have not checked that out, I really enjoyed Skeleton Crew. It is definitely a family-oriented Star Wars story. I think it harkens back to a lot of Steven Spielberg style, how he used kids in the Goonies and E.T. and movies like that. So,
and you get a different view of the Star Wars world, right? First, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
well, and
some of that like
sort of brings us,
huh?
Yeah, I was going to say that sort of brings us back to RPGs. That one of the cool things with Star Wars is because it is so broad, you can totally do a story that's like not about the Jedi and the Sith at all,
Yeah,
right? The Mandalorian as like, hey, we're just going to do like space western. Well, it's season 1 of the Mandalorian at least.
Yeah.
Or we're gonna do crime drama. We're gonna do Guy Ritchie like crime drama.
Or we're gonna do crime drama. Or we're gonna do our obligatory Akira Kurosawa reference thing. Except this time we're gonna do it about Kagemusha instead of the Seven Samurai, because we like that movie.
Yeah.
Right.
Or we're gonna do a pirate story, which is what Skeleton.
Or we're gonna do a pirate's story. Yeah.
Well, let's move into role playing games. I was just gonna say I forgot to earlier though. You're talking about how the original short Clone Wars led up to episode 3, and with General Grievous, he just kind of appears, and I think, and if I'm remembering correctly, the original reason that General Grievous has labored breathing is because in that last episode of the Clone Wars, is he's kidnap Palpatine and trying to get away, Mace Windu crushes his lung with the Force to try to stop him.
Yeah.
And of course they rewrote.
Well,
that.
and also it's funny because Grievous in like episode 3 kind of comes off as a chump, like he splits his arms and has 4 lightsabers, but then Obi-Wan doesn't. I mean, he gets sort of beat up a little bit in the fight, but he's not really ever obviously in danger, I would say, until right at the end.
Then he pulls the Indiana Jones and just shoots him.
Yeah, it just shoots him. And then Grievous in the Clone Wars animated show he's fighting like 5 Jedi and kills 3 of them and wounds the other 2 single-handedly without basically even breaking a sweat. And then a whole like gunship full of ARC troopers comes in to fight him and he takes them on, and it's awesome. It's it's pretty cool stuff.
All right. Okay, let's go ahead and move into role-playing games. And we've kind of compiled a list of the various Star Wars role-playing games and some that are sort of inspired by Star Wars. And of course, the original is the West End Games D6 system. I backed. It's closed now, but they this last year did a Kickstarter not for the Star Wars D6 but for the system itself to kind of clean it up and reissue it, as a generic rule set. So I'm eagerly awaiting that Kickstarter to fulfill this year. But I have not actually ever played. I have a PDF copy of it that I've looked through, but I've never actually played the West End Star Wars.
Oh well, yeah, I've been able to play it and recently I played it a few times way back, but just moved to other games. I think way back when it first came out. But I always loved the books. It was always good to look through my friends' books and the like, and because it was like, oh, some great Star Wars pictures because they just used with stills.
Yeah.
But I played it recently and it's a good game. I mean, I think it's a good game. It definitely gets the feel of Star Wars, and they really integrate, I think, something that I feel like they have to do in some later, maybe in one later game at least that I'm familiar, or maybe in a couple of later games, right? I think they do a really good job in the West End of integrating the Force and its pervasiveness without making it, super overt, much like it was in the original, until Return of the Jedi, until it was kind of subtle, right? I mean, other than Luke, and Darth Vader, it was kind of, So I think they really do a good job of conveying the feel of the original trilogy, and then the novels that came like after, right? Like the Heir to the Empire trilogy and Jedi Academy and all those kind of things. So I thought it was a good game. It was a good game, and it was fun to play even recently. It felt Star Wars. I was like, oh wow, this definitely feels Star Wars. Yeah.
What is the
I think.
Yeah. Maybe you can explain for anybody who hasn't played it or looked at it. What's kind of the core? How do the mechanics?
It's a dice pool of D6s, right? Skill plus attribute, like a number, and then you try to hit a target number, right? Okay. And then you have some meta currencies depending on the edition. You have some meta currencies that mimic the Force in a way, and your luck, your general cool factor, things that you're like, well, how the hell does that happen, and when you see it happen in the movies and type of thing. So
I think also the West End Star Wars is cool because the original material is all like very much just what Star Wars was like at the time. And then there's also people who have done a lot of like fan-made updates, and including things from later Star Wars into essentially like digital splat books and stuff. So you can sort of do whatever version of Star Wars you want with that. With like you can have the newer stuff, or you can do it more like, here's what Star Wars was like in the 80s, and we're not going to include clone troopers or any of the sequel trilogy stuff or anything like that. It's just going to be Star Wars as it was sort of originally, and that's kind of a neat thing.
You kind of almost have an OSR for West End Star Wars community. It's
Yeah.
much smaller, but
Yep.
you can find it online where people have kept the game alive and continue to develop it. The people who love it, which is great. Yeah.
Yeah, but like Arlen said, there's plenty of stuff out there that you can incorporate Clone War stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So even if you have it during like the Empire era or shortly thereafter, you can, because there's material out there. You can have like the rare toad tank. I guess I call them toad tanks, but like the clone the separatist tanks, right? That look,
Mm-hmm. The AAT.
yeah.
I think it just occurred to me that something would be kind of fun if you wanted to do like a real old school role playing game. Use that as your role playing game and use Star Wars Legos as your minis for
Yeah.
or
Okay.
if you need to get it, want to create a battle map kind of situation, just use a Star Wars. I mean, you could always use the old action figures if you had them, but
Yeah.
Legos
Or
scale
the
wise work a lot better for minis.
depending on what you're doing, the Star Wars Legion miniatures are really
those
good.
Are good.
Yeah.
They're well done, and relative to a lot of the other games are not that bad in terms of expensive. I mean, they're expensive plastic, but they're not like as bad expensive plastic as some other games. So
You don't have to paint the Legos though.
You don't have to paint the Legos, which is nice. Although, like, stormtroopers aren't that hard to paint, right? They're just black and white.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. So that's West End. And of course, that system, West End themselves expanded it for other stuff before it finally went defunct. But so it's not like that. But I think it started as it wasn't Star Wars their first game that they did with the D6 system.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then probably the next one to come out in terms of role playing games, I think, would be the D Wizards of the Coast D20. They had a D20 Star Wars which then sort of morphed into the Saga Edition Star Wars role playing game, which was almost kind of the testing ground for 4th edition D&D. Some of their mechanics. And again, I don't have any experience with those particular. Do you guys?
Wow, dang, dude. No, I played them. It's D20. It's D20 space. I mean, I don't know. I don't think the campaigns were. I think and that, unlike West End and maybe it's because this one came out during the Clone War, so Jedi are well defined, extremely powerful. It's very overt what they do. Then I think that's everyone wants to play a Jedi or a Phaser, right? If you don't, then you're lacking.
Well,
and based on the way that maybe we were going to say that, but based on the way the D20 system is, it's all about min-maxing.
Yeah, there's a lot of min-maxing, and there's a lot of, like, on a fundamental level, the way that they do force stuff basically just gives you an entire another pool of resources to draw from. And so, like, on a mechanical level, it's hard to imagine how a Jedi couldn't be more capable than the other characters around them, because they have, it's sort of like having a health pool and a mana pool instead of just a health pool. And so it's like, well, of course you can do all sorts of different things. That's one of the biggest problems with the Knights of the Old Republic games, or at least the first one, is that the balance between Jedi classes and non-Jedi classes is just, broadly speaking, I think the consensus is it's weighted in favor of the Jedi.
Yeah.
Which,
maybe that's okay. I mean,
yeah. I mean, in the fiction, I think it's all right. It just also gets to the weird thing of, like, okay, well, like, is one level sort of right in classic D20 era stuff of, like, kind of like the whole thing of, like, well, prestige classes are just inherently better than the base classes, so you want to get to prestige as fast as you can, right? That it's kind of like that to me.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm not as familiar with the Knights of the Old Republic games and stuff, but was the D20, that to me is the first time I can remember. Again, I've looked through the books, I haven't played the game. This first time I can ever remember there being any kind of suggestion that there are different types of Jedi, not Sith and Jedi, but like you've got the consular Jedi versus I can't remember what it is. One of is more of a
I
diplomat,
think
and one of
so.
is more of
Well,
an actual warrior, and it gives you slightly different
yeah.
feats
So
or
Yeah, they put like
options.
different Jedi subclasses,
yeah,
I guess. Or
the Jedi. So it's basically the three like core things for the class. So you have the Jedi Guardian, who is better at
Yeah,
combat with the lightsaber. The Jedi, I think it's Sentinel and Consular, and Consular gets skills and like charisma stuff, and Sentinel gets force power stuff. Basically, right? They get like the largest force pool per level and
yeah,
the most bonuses there. But yes, KOTOR does that. And I think it comes from the D20 Star Wars and is present throughout Saga Star Wars, basically.
yeah.
Well, I mean,
Which
I think the cool thing about the D20 stars, they had books like for every genre,
They've got a
every era.
ton.
Sorry,
Yeah,
right?
they've got a
And then
ton of splat books for all the different things you might want to do.
yeah,
they had that one where there's that one Force user who brings down the planet. What's the guy's name?
Star Killer from the Force
Yeah, Star
Unleashed.
Killer. Yeah, they have a Force Unleashed book. They got Knights of the Old Republic books. Clone Wars books.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's really good.
yeah. I kind of, it's interesting to me of course, the age of the internet. If you've grown up with the internet, it's nothing to you. To me, I can remember before the internet when you actually had to have reasoned discussions and cite your evidence for things and admit you were wrong when you were wrong. But when you get online, there are these people who they think they don't kind of get what was in the movie and what wasn't in the movie and what George Lucas did and didn't do, and so it becomes why are some lightsabers green and some blue? And there are people who will swear the origin of that distinction is the difference between the Jedi Guardian and the Jedi Consular. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, they gave Luke a green lightsaber. They didn't really ever explain it. It was just like, they can have green lightsabers now.
It just
And
was.
Yep.
there's a special effects reason for it. This is why they did it because it showed up better on screen. But
Yeah.
but then you can say, well, he had to build it on his own, so he cobbled together.
Well, and they had to cut, right? The original plan for Return of the Jedi was to start with a scene of Luke assembling his lightsaber,
Yeah.
which would have been cool to see. In
Yeah.
the obviously now we've seen plenty of versions of characters assembling lightsabers in extended media, but that one in particular I think would be cool.
Yeah.
And then
of course,
presumably he could have gone through like the menu and seen like, okay, well here's what it looks like in blue, and here's what it looks like in red, and here's what it looks like in yellow, and then that would explain for all time for everybody,
Yeah. Well, and there's the added confusion of the Luke Skywalker's toys for the first two movies had yellow lightsabers.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, that was I remember that.
In fact, the first lightsaber I got that was kind of built for a kid to hold and swing it was yellow because it was patterned off the action figure. The Return of the Jedi figure had a green lightsaber, but the ones they made for Empire and for original Star Wars were yellow. Obi-Wan had a blue one, but it was really kind of an interesting. And then, of course, eventually we've got a canon reason for why there are yellow lightsabers, but it took them a long time to get there. So that was
Mace Windu gets the only purple one because he's,
he wanted
Samuel Jackson.
Yeah, and it just speaks to how insane fandom is. The reason he had a purple lightsaber is because that was his condition. Was I want to be able. There's going to be this big battle scene with 100 Jedi, and I want everybody to be able to see where I am.
Yeah.
But then we have to get a canonical reason of why Mace Windu is this special being within the way the Force works, and that's why his lightsaber is purple. I will say, for all the problems of the Acolyte, it was cool to watch the lightsaber turn red when the character goes to the dark side. I thought it was kind of rushed for it to happen that quick, but the visual of it was actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so next we get after D20 Saga, we I guess the which is it still current, or they've ended, or they still ended the Fantasy Flight Star Wars?
It's another company's publishing, or
Yeah, all of
make
the Star Wars stuff shifted around a couple years ago. So like Legion is now through um, CMON, Cool Mini or Not, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe through it's like through Asmodee or something. All of it shifted around, but there's still Fantasy Flight Star Wars being published.
Right. Or at least printed, if
Or
not
printed.
developed, right?
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
being developed anymore, but you can find Edge, a company named Edge has
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
sure they're a subsidiary of somebody. I don't know,
Yeah.
but I mean I you probably play that Star Wars, right? Or ran that Star Wars?
I have played and ran that version of Star Wars. And it kind of like the Wizards of the Coast version before it is pretty expansive. They created, you know, not only source books but also adventure modules and supplements for, you know, the three eras of the films. But they've also created that kind of in between, you know, the early age of the Empire where Solo and the Rebels animated series and the Bad Batch and those stories.
Well, and
because
Rogue
they One.
Like the original form of the line, it was all original trilogy era stuff, and it was 3 different core books for different versions of that, right? Because there was I don't remember what they called, Edge of the Empire. I think that was
like
the
Scum and Villainy.
Yeah, smugglers and like Han Solo and Chewbacca stuff, and then there's the Rebellion book, and then Force and Destiny was for Jedi. And then they also had a Force Awakens starter set. They didn't do a core book for the Force Awakens, but they did a starter set for each of those eras, and then they also did a Force Awakens starter set, and then they did a ton of splat books, and then they did some other era stuff. So they did like a 2-part Clone Wars splat book set.
Separatists and the other one is Collapse of the Republic.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they're like blue. They're like a blue. They're cool. I have.
Yeah. And then as related to that line, they also did, because they did one book that was collecting all of the equipment from all the different books, and one book that was collecting all of like the NPCs and kind of like enemies from all the different books.
They did like a Rebels book.
And they did the Star Wars Rebels book, and I can't remember the other. I think that was pretty close to the end, if I remember.
Yeah, that's right. That's close to the end.
I will say I respect Fantasy Flight for just doing sort of a starter set for the sequels, and then basically acknowledging there's nothing in the sequels so different from the original trilogy that you just can't use our 3 core rule books to play in the sequel era. Again, it's X-Wings and TIE Fighters and Stormtroopers and Rebel Troopers.
I mean, for Edge of the Empire, I mean, I don't know. I got in with the beta, and we ran like a full campaign through Edge of the Empire all the way to Bespin, and we just never got to do my finale, which I wanted to do at during the events of The Empire Strikes Back on Bespin.
Yeah,
but that never happened for me, because I was going to have, like, I know it sucked, because it would have been great for them the players to see all I wouldn't have put them in the main part, but there's the Bespins are really big. There are other things that players could have done when Lando said, "Okay, we're on our own," type of thing.
Yeah.
They were pretty advanced. It was cool.
Yeah, I enjoy that. I would run it again, and I would play in it again, given the opportunity.
I think running a Age of Rebellion.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting. Of course, now you can get the Genesis system, which is the core book that fuels that. I thought it was really interesting the way Fantasy Flight basically used other people's IPs to develop their own games. Like, they briefly had Warhammer Fantasy, and that's kind of an early iteration of the Genesis system. And then they refined it a little more for Star Wars. And then by the time they got to Star Wars, and they were then able to kind of create it as its own system, and then start taking like their board games and saying, "Yeah, you can use the Genesis system to play Descent. You can use the Genesis system to play our own IPs." Android. But they completely use their license with the Games Workshop and Lucasfilm to pay for their beta testing for that system. I thought it was pretty clever.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, I really enjoy it, and it's definitely more of a narrative game than like an OSR West End, and D20 is D20, right? It's
So for people who
3.5 with engine.
aren't familiar, it's a dice pool system. So you've got part what you would expect in a dice pool, which is the dice that represent your natural abilities and training, and you're trying to get a number of successes on the die. But then you've also got some other die that factor in there that sort of represent the ebb and flow of the force and of destiny.
Right.
That can then it creates these situations where there's success and failure, but then there's also, you know, benefits and bane. I can't remember all the terminology they use, but basically you can succeed, but the dark side still causes something unfortunate to happen as a part of that. So you can, you know, succeed with a cost or fail with
The resolution
something fortunate could happen. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, because it's not numbers, it's symbols, right? So symbols represent success, some symbols represent failure. They cancel each other out when you look at the dice pool. Some represent like a boon, some represent like a bane, and those work to cancel each other out. And then you can, like BJ said, you can have a success, but a bunch of banes, and that can either be interpreted as like stress that you're taking or a complication that can happen. And I think what's really cool to me is you really can resolve a lot of things with one die roll, right? The opposed thing is not really necessary. It becomes player facing because the player takes their pool of dice, and the negative dice that can counter your positive attribute and skill dice are those of the adversary, right? So, so you have dice that have countering symbols to your success symbols on your good dice, and you have your bad dice. I guess the colors in Star Wars at least are, green, yellow, green, yellow, and then red and purple are the bad ones, and then you have a black dice that complications, and white dice which are actually force, and blue dice are like the boon dice, right? So so it's really it's fun. I mean, it's almost like a little mini game every time you roll a dice, and it's like you can quickly interpret what you get, and then people are like, oh, I got the lightsaber. Oh man, I got the Death Star. Type of.
And then the rules encourage the game master to include everybody else at the table of, okay, you succeeded, but at a cost, or you everybody. What are some ideas about how are we going to tell a story about what these dice tell us happened?
And I think was kind of nice too is I mean, I don't know if it's rules have written. We've just done it forever, but you can also bank some of those and create like a momentum pool. So we did that for a while too. If you have extra boons, because 2 boons will do something cool, but if you have extra boons, they just become part of a dice pool, and people can pull them, as they roll, before they roll. Because that increasing luck. And I also love how they have this, and I've tried to get this to happen in other games, and I think Zweihander does a really cool thing. Is they have like your force and your destiny is represented by little chips, and then you can pull and bump your dice to from a green to a attribute dice to a skill dice. You can bump it up. In contrast, the GM can flip those dice, and now they're negative.
You start off with a number of
meta currencies, really
white chits, 1 per player.
No, they roll the force dice.
Oh yeah, that's right. You roll the force dice.
Black and white.
But then when you spend it, it flips over to the dark side, and it becomes meta currency for the game master.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, Zweihander does that too. At least the most recent, not the Reforger. Hopefully does that too, but the most recent edition, Zweihander does that too. Use a fate and becomes like a bad luck or something.
Yeah,
it's kind of.
I was just going to add, there was definitely a time when, like, online RPG discourse, anytime somebody wanted to talk about, annoying, why does the company create their own system with funky dice? And what they meant was the Star Wars game.
Yes.
It was definitely seen as like especially in the sort of like naturally kind of conservatively oriented with regard to games position of like, well, why do we need new editions of D&D? It was definitely like, well, this is the apex of companies making funky systems that are hard to use, and you need special dice and all that sort of stuff, which is just a funny bit of history.
It could be a little unwieldy to try to have to come up with a reason every time you get that boon or bane, and it's not just a success or failure, but now you've got to figure out what the complication is, particularly if it runs contrary to the actual success or failure. They give you some guidelines and just sort of some defaults to use. But
Right.
but
Yeah, they have like a table and they give you suggestions. What I thought was neat when I was running Age of Rebellion, like they actually had a way to use it in the battle system, and you just roll one time during like a phase in the battle, and this outcome is like what determines the ebb and flow of
yeah,
the conflict,
yeah,
and different depending on the characters. I thought was neat is the characters could do certain things during in between the phases that can aid or not what was going on. So I thought it was really, and it did kind of show that sort of ebb and flow, like early victories, many like early victories, much like on Hoth, and then the overwhelming power of the Empire just kind of beats you down, and you got to get out of there, type of thing. So it was good. It was really neat to be able to use like, oh man, how are they going to do a battle system? How are we going to mimic this battle, right, and make it cool and give the players some narrative engagement. And then I just had all around the table. I just had, okay, it's your turn to roll for the phase. Your turn to roll, and then, I thought it was just like, oh, don't mess up, type of thing.
yeah. I felt like it when I
was good.
ran it. It does a good job of handling everything from hand to hand combat to shootouts with blasters to chases with speeders to ship to
Oh,
ship
right.
action in space. It handled it all really well, and I noticed it does a good job when you try to do it. Some of the things it does that I admire that I think because we play Traveler a lot. Traveler does well too that I like is when you're on a big ship, it makes sure everybody has something to do to help. I think
Right.
that's in there, so nobody's left out while the pilot and the gunner.
Space battles are fun. They're actually
Yeah.
pretty fun.
Um, and then that same you can through those boons kind of get what we get going into Traveler sometime, which is the task chain. It's like, okay, I can pass that success on to the next person who's
Yeah.
picking up what I've done, give them an advantage or some kind of asset when they do what they're going to do.
Yeah, it's a cool narrative system. I really enjoy it. I mean, I think once we finish this Age of Rebellion, well, we might jump back to the Age of Rebellion because we've done 2 seasons, and then I have another adventure idea I want, and then but they all want to play Force and Destiny because that's the one we haven't done.
I think I'll give a minor spoiler just because I think it's kind of funny. But the starter adventure in Edge of the Empire is you're on Tatooine and you had a run in with the criminals there with the Hutts, and if it's kind of suggesting what to do, for further adventures to the game master, and it says something about you could turn this person over to Jabba the Hutt and never have to worry about him again, unless of course for some reason Jabba dies, but that would never happen.
Yeah, it's good. It's nice little reference and referential.
Yeah.
Like there was an Age of Rebellion RPG Day adventure that had Darth Vader like show up, and he wasn't like he had stood and fought him. It was like, you got to get out of here type of thing.
I have a question. I was going to ask about that. How do you guys feel about and it goes beyond Star Wars, when you're playing Star Wars, Star Trek, Marvel, DC, any kind of genre, with you're playing in an established world that has its own canon, its own history. How do you feel about Darth Vader showing up, or Captain America showing up, or Spock showing up? How do you guys feel about it? Because I know some people say you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't have cameos by established heroes and villains.
I think it kind of depends on, or for me, I would say it depends on like the specific flavor of the campaign. Like, I sort of see, like, to use the Star Wars example, one way to do it that works, I think, well is basically kind of like how they handled the pre-existing characters in Rogue One, where you have Grand Moff Tarkin and Darth Vader who are there and are part of the kind of larger story going on. But Ben Mendelsohn's character is definitely presented as like the primary antagonist for the movie. And I think that can be a fun way to handle that sort of thing, right? That like Darth Vader isn't really your character's enemies, but he is like a big force in the universe, and so he might show up and be, dangerous. And you can, I think, do really cool things with that type of, having a big, powerful enemy, especially a character like Darth Vader that everybody knows, and be like, shows up. It's like, oh shit, it's about to pop off. Darth Vader is here. That I think can be a really fun moment. I think it can also be really unsatisfying if you're playing a game where you're like, oh, we're big damn heroes, and then Darth Vader shows up and it's like, nope, we can't beat Darth Vader because he's like the story character. Or
Plot
on the
armor.
other hand, be like, yeah, the plot armor stuff, or the other side of that of like, well, when Darth Vader shows up, I don't really want like my handful of PCs to beat up on Darth Vader because that doesn't seem right. Like,
Yeah.
you know. So I think it
You could
depends.
probably
I don't know. It's
screw it up the other way too, where you could use a hero as kind of a
Right.
Deus Ex Machina, where
Yeah.
you're in over your head. Oh no, Luke Skywalker shows up and saves you. It's like, well, that's also kind
Yeah.
of not what you want in a role playing game.
Yeah, I think what I've done that's been pretty fun is have them make cameos, but not really be involved in like the the story, right? Or
Yeah.
be more patron to the characters. Send them on. I mean, hey, you could if you wanted to run like a Force and Destiny with Inquisitors or something. Darth Vader's their patron,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or something, right? So I think that could be a cool way to do it. Or they just see a scene that they know from one of the shows or one of the the movies, or there's a reference to that, and I think that works pretty well. And then on the other hand, like I know, like I had toyed with the idea of having the player characters present, like at the Battle of Scarif, right? But I was like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I said they were there, but we never played it out. So I kind of let
Yeah.
them narrate like what they did, what happened, type of thing, right? So I think same thing I'm going to do. I'm going to have them there, like when we do this next jump. I'll have them like be involved in Endor or Jakku, but then we're like after that or we're in between or something like that. So I don't know. We'll see. But
Well, it's a classic. I think it's a classic issue of like how much do you want your campaign to be like fun setting theme park, and how much do you want it to be like serious exploration of like life in that world, if that makes sense, right? Like at some point, if the rebels characters are at all of the big battles that we know from the movies, it's going to feel like, oh, this is like being on one of the rides with animatronics at like Disneyland or something, where it's like, oh, experience the story again but as yourself. And it's like, well, that's that can be fun, but I don't think that would be very fun for a long campaign, to me at least.
no, I think it's definitely much more satisfying to have the players like, oh, I know what's going on in the background, but we have our mission here.
We don't know what's going to happen.
You know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So like, and they kind of work in parallel, and they learn things that maybe they know that if they watch the shows, they know the other characters learn. And then what do you do with it, right? I think
Well, and what I'm saying is, I think that's similar for like almost every pre-existing setting, right? I mean, I think it's basically the same. Like in Forgotten Realms, you don't really just want to like see all of the characters that are in the Forgotten Realms books and play out. Here's just the things that like are in the books as what happened in the world, or in Eberron or anywhere else you might play. That there's a you want to experience it as like the characters do, rather than just here's the sequence of things that are fun.
Yeah, I think you need character buy-in too. A character who is a fan, and not a troll type fan, but a fan of the verse, is going to respect the integrity of the verse, right? So I feel like it's interesting because we're playing the last. It's not Star Wars, but we're playing the last book in the Enemy Within and the Warhammer Fantasy campaign, and it goes through the time of troubles in the Empire, and some of the players are, old Empire, scholars, right? So they know what's going on, and I guess for them, since they have a buy-in, they're like, "This is cool that we're like rubbing elbows with these people," and and I guess the cool thing is, I think the way the adventure works is that they just like the NPCs are just kind of going through their script, but the players are like foils in the script. So I think that's what they're having fun doing, is like we're throwing wrenches in all these, what's supposed to happen, which I think is.
I think the challenge is probably similar if you're going to play a World War II role playing game set in World War II, but not an alternative history one where it's like, no, all the major battles are going to take place and the outcomes are going to, and we've got to find some place in the middle to set a fictional story where you can still have an adventure and successes and failures that are engaging without changing
Yeah.
the course of history. Which I guess is probably the same thing if you're going to write a movie set, historical fiction. It's that same.
Yeah, I think like
challenge.
a lot of storytelling where the expectation is not necessarily that the characters can change world events at large, but we still care about what happens to them and what they experience.
Only Ridley Scott and Quentin Tarantino are allowed to do that. I just watched Gladiator 2 last night.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's. I think the last thing we wanted to talk about, the last topic we want to cover, are sort of Star Wars inspired role playing games where it's not Star Wars, but it's clearly an homage to Star Wars. You're tapping into the same archetypes, the same vibe, the same types of story. The first one, and probably the one that is probably most well known right now, is Scum and Villainy, and that is from Evil Hat Productions, and that is a basically Blades in the Dark in space, and you play smugglers and thieves and bounty hunters. So that's one. Do you guys have any experience? I've got the book and I've kind of thumbed through it, but I haven't really dove too deep into it.
No, I've not played those.
So I've played some other Blades in Dark games. I haven't played that one, but
Yeah.
I like the system a lot. I think as far as like story game systems go, Blades in the Dark to me like works really well. And I think the setup for Scum and Villainy is if you want like basically what A New Hope feels like in between leaving Tatooine and arriving at the Death Star, it's like the perfect fit for that, where you've got like kooky cast of characters and everybody has kind of their own specific thing, but they're all on one ship and have kind of one sort of like overarching goal for the campaign, but everybody has their own separate goals and stuff. And I think that's the place where it would work really well. And that's kind of the default setting for the game, is that you're like the crew of a ship and you can work with the rebels, or they're called something, right? It's all not Star Wars names, but it's Star Wars stuff, right? So you can work with rebels, like bounty hunting for Jabba the Hutt. You can do any of these different sort of at the fringe of the Empire sort of things.
I guess when you think about it,
your crew, basically.
The original Star Wars movie is kind of a heist.
It's cool. It's fun. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of that heist feeling, and Blades in the Dark does a good job, I think, of like the core game loop is basically about you do stuff in the action sequences of like the heist stuff to fund your time recovering from the action sequences in the downtime stuff, which causes complications that cause you to need to go do more action stuff. And it does a really good job of creating this like continual, like if you buy into the game, you kind of always have things to take care of for your character, partly because it's like hard to get ahead, but also it's like the fun of like continually getting more and more mixed up with stuff in the world, right?
Yeah. It sounds like it might model Firefly a little as well.
Yeah, I think Firefly is listed in the influences as like this is a thing that fits well.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. Another one, which is available, is White Star, and this is basically White Box, but done for space opera, including it's got I mean, it's basically white box D&D rules, but
so it's very white box D&D. I think White Star, in particular, does a really cool thing where, like, if you look at all of the classes in the D20 era Star Wars and are like, well, it's cool that there are all these classes, but I just want to play like a character who is an archetype without having to balance all the classes and stuff. White Star is particularly great in doing the like BX style race as class, except in this case it's just like class as class, if that makes sense, where it's like if you just want to play the Obi-Wan Kenobi character, there is like the old Mystic character class, and that's just, you know, you pick that one and you play that guy and it's fun. Or there's the I think it's called like the alien brute sidekick or something, that's just Chewbacca, and
Yeah.
all of the different like archetypes that are recognizable from Star Wars that are just like, here's the set to play that specific thing.
There are 4 classes. The aristocrat, which you actually, if you wanted to, could easily become a core class to play a bard in white box D&D, because it's just about social influence. The mercenary, which is your fighter, the pilot, and then the Star Knight.
Yeah. Well, and there's a specific supplement that has a bunch of those other secondary classes essentially that are like, here's a specific archetype from, like, you know, here's the military officer, here's, I think, is that like the alien brute sidekick, here's like the I think there's like 2 or 3 different droid classes in that one that are like, you know, you can be C-3PO or R2-D2 or a battle droid, whichever one you want to be, sort of thing.
That's in the white box.
White Star.
In White Star, there's, I don't remember what the.
I've got it here in front of me.
That thing sounds like it could be pretty fun. So you think you could put it in any era, or is it specific? Or would it be...
because you could make it any Star Wars era, I think. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I've not played any of those. If you don't have another one, we I don't know if we mentioned it maybe before we talked. Maybe we mentioned it in the course of our discussion. But
I have one more, which is kind of interesting. Let me, if you want to.
Okay, go ahead.
About Traveler. This is Rebel Scum. It's a really short. It's by Polymorph. I don't know if I'm real crazy about the system from 9th Level Games, but it looks like the package of an old Star Wars toy. And the pictures of the different classes look like the backed on a card in a blister pack action figure. It uses it's kind of interesting dice. Your class, you use different dice based on your class. That they've got the Revolutionary, the Rogue. What else have they got in here? It's really kind of cute. It looks like it's a game made to play with old Star Wars toys. And I will warn you, if you want to look at this though, this is called an anti-fascist space opera. Yeah, and I think there's no question that the original Star Wars was about a bunch of freedom fighters trying to overthrow an oppressive fascist regime. That said, this might offend some people's political sensibilities to just read it out there in the open. But it is, they're very upfront about, this is a game for people who hate fascists. Fascists are not allowed to play this game. But it is.
There is like this segment of the Star Wars fandom that are Imperial apologists.
It's bizarre.
Yeah, they'll tell you that destroying the Death Star was like basically the equivalent of blowing up Alderaan.
It was a war crime.
Yeah, it was a war crime.
Well, we have to blame Kevin Smith for that. There's that throwaway line in Clerks. Randall's talking about.
Is it? Is that where that
all the contractors, the janitors, just trying to make a living. They got blown up along with the actual.
Maybe they're working for.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's my counterpoint, is like all the stormtroopers blown up on a system called the Death Star, who somehow didn't really know what the Empire stood for. Like, well,
I get it.
You ever wonder if we're the baddies?
Yeah.
Now in Andor, though, those people are forced into forced labor. So that's a different type of story, right? In the Andor situation.
Yeah.
That's cool. Anyway,
which is kind of interesting because
forced labor.
Andor was introduced in Rogue One as sort of being this morally neutral, like, this idea that, hey, if you're going to overthrow a corrupt government, you got to get your hands dirty.
Or almost said Che Guevara, but it's not. It's Saul Guerra, right? Saul Guerra.
I think that rhyme is probably maybe not coincidental.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Traveler, right? We talked about Traveler at some point, and I think you can use Traveler to run the Star Wars universe. I think it really works. Space combat, And even with all the tools and all the stuff that's out there, you could, I would say, even in earlier incarnations, for sure, with the new Mongoose Traveler 2, I think there's a lightsaber somewhere in one of the splat books. But for sure, even in the older stuff, you could there's like in the Traveler era, you could make a lightsaber, right, with some of the supplement, like a book, Fire Fusion and Steel, you could make stuff.
Yeah.
But
Well,
what's really cool is you can, because of Traveler, I think the tech system that they have, and they really go into great detail, at least in the Mega Traveler era they did, where what represents what at different tech levels. And you could, you could even run, honestly, you could run Star Trek using Traveler rules, because you could find the tech level where disintegrators are there and force fields are there and stuff like that. So I think it's definitely a viable choice. And Traveler, again, is an old school system, in the target number, roll 2d6.
And I think the psionic system you could use to adequately capture the force for purposes of a role playing game.
Yeah, I mean, you could homebrew it. I'm sure someone's come up with that.
Well, yeah, that's part of the thing with Star Wars games is that so many systems have like Star Wars hacks or people in generic systems done right. Like if you for whatever reason were possessed with the kind of impetus to play GURPS, I'm sure there are people who have done a lot of GURPS Star Wars Savage Worlds. I'm sure there's plenty of people who have done Star Wars stuff with that one. We talked a little bit, I think, before we started recording about there's a 5e hack for Star Wars that is, I think, surprisingly good. But if you just want to do so many of the various kind of games out there that people have been like, how could we put this into like Star Wars terms in varying levels of success, I would say, but it's cool to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, any final thoughts on Star Wars?
So I will put forward one particular homebrew hack for Star Wars with a game that isn't normally Star Wars, which is that there is a PDF that someone did that is Burning Wheel Star Wars, which if you know about Burning Wheel as a system, you will know that it doesn't really have anything to do with Star Wars normally. But the person who put this PDF together makes, I think, some really good points about why it sort of has a reason to fit in there. Part of it is that you have these fairly complicated subsystems that the fight system in Burning Wheel is basically for sword fights. And so it, for Jedi fighting with lightsabers, it works pretty well as getting like the real complexities of lightsaber combat. You also have, I think, a really interesting thing. The author of the PDF does a cool thing where they sort of take the fight between Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker in The Empire Strikes Back and then the one in Return of the Jedi and model both of those and say this is a real place where Burning Wheel shines, because in their opinion the fight that's at the end of The Empire Strikes Back is a fight where the two characters are trying to hurt each other, and the fight at the end of Return of the Jedi is using the social combat system, and they just happen to be using lightsabers while being in what is really essentially a series of charisma checks for like whose worldview is going to prevail on the other one in a debate that happens to include lightsabers. And I think if you believe in that interpretation of those two scenes, you will see immediately like, oh, this is why this sort of game would work really well, because I think it does put a good point about like, Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker are much more attacking each other in the first scene, and in the second one they're mostly talking to each other, and then it's not really until the very end when Darth Vader has essentially won the social combat encounter and convinced Luke to attack him that we actually get into sword striking.
That is a perfect segue into a game I had forgotten until you mentioned this. It's called I Have the High Ground, and it is it is called a collaborative 2-player dueling RPG of banter, posturing, and capes. And it references Three Musketeers, it references Zorro, it references Star Wars. But this is not a complete game. what it is a game of escalating, trading barbs, trading positioning until somebody's resolve breaks and they attack, and then you go back to whatever the combat resolution is for whatever game you're otherwise playing. But it's really kind of a neat, it really plays out the dramatic aspect that you see of duels in movies and in literature of them, changing the same kind of thing. It's like, well, if you say this, I do this, and then there's sort of a sort of rock paper scissors style way of resolving who kind of wins this first pass, and then at some point when your resolve breaks, the rule is you have to make an attack and you go back to your thing. But it was kind of a cool little thing you could just drop in if you wanted to make dueling. But you could do it with, I said this for many genres, but if you wanted to use it in a Star Wars game, it could be a Jedi and a Sith circling each other in a lightsaber duel. It could be, Han Solo and Lando Calrissian playing, gambling over who's going to win, the ship. It can be R2D2 and another droid at another terminal hacking to see who can take control of the system first. It works either way in any of that stuff. Or you could apply that to other genres as well. So, but that was one that I'm glad you mentioned. Burning. I completely forgotten about it. It was sitting right there on the shelf, and I was like, oh yeah, I've intended to might like to play that sometime. Maybe get you guys to play it. We'll put it up on Karl's YouTube channel.
Yeah, well, if only someone could run Burning Wheel for us. And I think that's probably like a cool actionable we can try to challenge ourselves with. There's always a
run Burning Wheel with Star Wars.
Well, no, run
Burning Wheel
run a Star Wars game. Run a Star Wars game with these systems that we looked at.
Yeah.
Not, it doesn't have to be one of the obvious. I'm more than happy to, I used to have the Saga books, but they've been borrowed and never returned along the way. But I do have plenty of the Edge stuff. I have, I could get the WAG stuff. And some of these games you mentioned sound really fascinating to try to run a Star Wars game. And, we always have a Star Wars holiday every year. So maybe shooting or targeting for that.
I've always wondered, particularly the plot of the original Star Wars, which is basically save the princess from the castle. If you exclude the going back and blowing up the castle at the end. If you were to just be careful about how you planted it, if you tried to run it, maybe you couldn't do it with sci-fi because it'd be too obvious, but if you tried to run like a D&D game, how far could you get before one of the players was like, are we playing Star Wars? Because they're just, it's such a universal trope in adventure and fantasy and storytelling.
It's like I assume that neither of you read the YA fantasy series Aragon when you were kids.
I read the first
I was
book.
the age. Yeah, the first book is all of the plot points of Star Wars, right? It's just fantasy Star Wars, and if you're like 9, you don't necessarily notice the first time you read it. I think most of the people playing D&D would notice pretty quickly of the elements of Star Wars.
But also, to be honest, when you're 15 and you're writing a fantasy novel, you might not even realize you're just rewriting Star Wars.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of that. But I think you can do a lot with right, like George Lucas was really, or probably still is, but really into like all the Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey stuff. And I think you could, even without necessarily doing specifically like this is Star Wars stuff, you could just kind of take bits and pieces that feel Star Wars-y, right? Like basically the other sort of side of that is, I don't remember the term, but there's a term somebody came up with for basically like a combination of samurai and old westerns as like a genre, and being like that. Yeah, that's just Star Wars if you add space, right? Like, and so you could totally do that. You could do wandering samurai in the Old West, and have.
Well, it's funny to watch. For a fistful of dollars.
Yeah.
It juxtaposes it to the Kurosawa, to which one is
Yojimbo.
Yojimbo.
Yep.
But it's also visually funny to watch it and then go watch the scenes in Tatooine and go, oh my gosh, they just completely lifted the look
Yeah.
of Mos Eisley from from
Well, and it's right. It's the Hidden Fortress is
yeah.
the one that the original Star Wars, is most directly from, because it's the two bumbling fools who have the old general who are going to rescue the princess from the castle.
Yeah.
And so that's R2D2 and C3PO in A New Hope, right? But there's also, like, I referenced, I think I mentioned Kagamusha earlier, and like that movie basically got funded partly because George Lucas had made a whole bunch of money by then, and like helped secure a bunch of loans for that one. So that's kind of a cool bit of detail. But you could totally do, right, like a lot of the kind of either direction, right? You could do a story that has like the aesthetics of samurai stuff in like a Star Wars world, or the other side of like be, in a ancient non sci-fi setting, but have all the Star Wars stuff that is doing all those things.
We started off talking about the Shakespearean adaptation. I think the minor spoiler, but for the first one, you talked about the pulling in R2 and 3PO are the bumbling idiots from the Hidden Fortress, but of course R2 is actually the most competent character in the entire saga.
Yeah. He just,
But that's the funny thing is the way they turn R2D2 into a Shakespearean character is he has a little aside and he says, I'm going to act like an idiot. I'm basically going to play the part of the fool to keep a low profile so I don't get caught. And that's his whole character. And then
it's like almost like they're Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, right? Kinda. I don't know.
Kinda. Right. Yeah. I don't know. Unless you're Tom Stoppard. Right.
Karl, do you have any final thoughts on Star Wars and role-playing games?
I think I think we just need to have like an actionable and get some sort of game happening at some point in time.
So there's one more thing that I wanted to mention that I've just thought of, which is that for anybody who doesn't know, the very first version of the script that George Lucas tried to make as Star Wars was very different than the one that actually turned into the movie. The one that got used for filming the movie was like the fourth major rewrite of the script. And a couple of years ago, I don't remember who it was, maybe Image. No, it must have been Dark Horse, because I think they had the rights to Star Wars.
Oh, right. Yeah, I know. I know. Yeah, I saw it.
They did the Star Wars. That's a comic book adaptation of what the original script was like, and it's like really insane in a lot of ways, but it also kind of presents an interesting like alternate vision for what Star Wars could be, right? Like the Jedi and Sith aren't really like philosophically opposed. They just happen to be like two different kind of like political organizations, essentially, that the Sith have won and become. It's very Harkonnens and Atreides, basically, that the Sith are in ascendancy and have cut down the Jedi and all that sort of stuff. And so it's kind of an interesting further extra version of Star Wars that you could bring into your vision of what Star Wars should be.
Well, we talked about Kurosawa, their influence there in Campbell, but there's a ton of Dune also in the background there with Star Wars.
There's even a worm. In Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Well, and the Almighty Salak is kind of the mouth of the worm, and treated as at least the way they talk about it, like it's some sort of immortal divine entity. The way they talk about the sandworms. All right. Well, I have enjoyed this conversation. I'm glad you guys were able to join me for it. We'll get this episode out as quickly as I can edit it and get it out there for everybody. I was gonna say, a couple weeks ago we went to Disneyland and got to visit the Galaxy's Edge for the first time. It's a lot of fun. I actually got to interact with Boba Fett and the Mandalorian and Kylo Ren. I mean, it is, with a few exceptions, sequel era is the theme. But it's interesting. My son is 16. He's growing up. He's becoming more. He's a great kid. He still loves science fiction and fantasy. So it's not like he's become a stick in the mud. But I think one of the special things about Star Wars is that he's certainly a teenager at this point. And did you just walk through the corner and then into the opening where you see like the Millennium Falcon and these buildings that are clearly and you could just I could just see just the expression on his face. You know, the child come alive kid, right? And I'm pretty sure my wife saw that on my face standing there too. So it's interesting the kind of power Star Wars holds even through the rough times it's been with maybe some less successful films and TV shows lately, but just that how it's ingrained in our culture for everyone, but particularly if you're kind of a nerdy guy, you know, even more so. But so it'll still be here long after we're not. So, all right.
Yeah, there's a great YouTube video that a guy did that was talking about the influence of silent film on Star Wars. And one of the things he does was he puts together a couple of sequences where he has edited out the actual talking. And so it's just the music of the scene and then the things happening on scene. It's such a cool demonstration of just how much Star Wars like tells all of the story that's being told visually, right? All of the sequences that you can totally follow without any, including that there are long sequences that don't have very much talking at all, right? Or just only have like a tiny bit of back and forth that is not necessary to follow. And it's pretty cool to see like, yeah, any scene with Darth Vader, you can tell exactly what's going on, even if he's not talking, because somehow, despite being totally covered up, David Prowse is like incredibly expressive inside the costume.
Yeah. I think we can't remember John Williams' music is basically one of the main characters of Star Wars. It really tells a story. Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, I think we can wrap it up. Any parting words of wisdom? Yep. All right. Well, thank you again, guys. May the force be with you.
May the force be with you.
A Nerds and Co broadcast, cerebral podcast. Let's savor all the flavors from the sign of Capstrong. All styles and pods past, cerebral podcast. You're counting down your last as you admire them all. All that's left, try and remember it. You can bring it, you can hide, you can bomb in any order. But never bring a real toss running for the border. Just a snack like a one master. Beer and hip, it's bread and butter. You can eat on a biggie, and his customers never say it. Doesn't savor in the flavor of the movies it created.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you guys ready?
Okay, go for it.
Hey guys, you know what the Wookiee said to the droid?
I think the joke got cut out by the audio compression.
Do it again.
Sound effect.
Yeah.
All right, we got a little bit of that one.
I can always go back and re-record that.